If we look at the continuum of enlightenment and endarkenment, one of the things that's obvious in a culture such as our own is the tremendous amount of separation, fear, isolation, and with that loneliness and even dread and anxiety about the dread and loneliness that we create, synthesize, and reproduce as a cult meme. And the question is, how do we get there? Because when we understand how we get here, we can understand how to backtrack. And so we start off with the sphere. We start off with the ultimate symbol. It's both one and infinite simultaneously. It's an infinite number of dots, an infinite number of planes or lines. That's how a computer will generate a sphere. But it's also one. And of course, in the paradigm of one, which is reinforced in so many ways mathematically, as one tasks a scientist, a physicist, a biologist, and anything observer of reality, we have to conclude that everything, every particle, and the illusion of the word particle, the illusion of the particle, is created by language. Particle doesn't exist until we create a word to frame it, and we frame it by marking its distinctions. We separate the particle from the space around it, because it's hard to say this is a finger unless we can say that this isn't a finger. So what we've just done through language is we've introduced the illusion of separation between the space and the object that is in the space. But the illusion falls apart rapidly when you ask yourself, could the finger exist without the space in which it exists? Could the finger exist, be there, if there was no space around it? And I'd say you have a hard mathematical case to make. Take away the space in which the finger exists, and where do you put the finger? And if there's no place for the finger, how does the finger exist? In other words, you cannot have the one without the other. That's a pretty strong connection. You know, we talk about codependent psychological relationships. I need you, and I need you. I need you. And we say, oh, that's codependent. But what about the codependent relationship between the object and the space around the object? Were there to be such a dialogue, the object would say, space, I need you. Without you, I do not exist because I exist within you. And space might reply, finger, I need you because you define me. If there is no border, how do I exist? How do you have space between nothing? So it's pretty clear that the finger is not only connected to the space around it, but in a codependent relationship with the space around it. And that space is in a codependent relationship with the objects that define it. So that collapses right there. So what isn't in the materialist paradigm? What isn't either space or an object? There's not much. That doesn't leave a lot of room, does it? Show me the reality that exists that is not space and is not object, that is not feminine, that is not masculine, that is not yin, that is not yang. Take away the yin and you have no yang. Take away the yang and you have no yin. So what is this battle? What is this argument through the chauvinistic paradigm that one is better than the other? It's a little bit of a moot point. If neither can exist without the other, a little bit of a moot point. Let's see. Am I better or worse than what I depend on to exist and what depends on me to exist? It's a co-dependent relationship. Now, this has been given, this has been assigned to a dirty word. And notice how we build this nonsense up. What's a dirty word? Well, it's a word associated with dirt. Is dirt dirty? Absolutely. Dirt is dirty. And so we'd be better off without dirt. Just take the entire planet and get rid of all the dirt and all the plants that grew out of the dirt and all the animals that eat the plants and all the people that eat the plants and the animals, and then we won't have any dirt. And then we won't have dirty words. And we won't have any life either. So what I'm illustrating is simply the absurd rationale by which cults create memes and status quo that have nothing to do with the underlying physics, the underlying science. Now, when you have the cult over here, and you have the one over here, which is more in touch with reality? The cult that says this is separate from this, that's a dirty word, and dirt is bad. But doesn't that mean you would be dead, cult leader? Well, don't talk back, right? Because the mathematics doesn't hold up. Do it because I said so. Do it because I said so. Underlies the cult. So it doesn't hold up. You have the reality of the one because every single area of science points to the interconnectedness of all things. Let's just take another one, because we've been so brainwashed to feel as cult members that we are meaningless, irrelevant, separate parts from all that is, that it doesn't necessarily occur to us that gravity is an equation that connects us to every other known part of the multiverse. It certainly connects us to everything on the planet, because this finger has gravity, and guess what? So does this finger. So does this pen. Now we trust that. I know this pen is going to fall. If I get another pen, if you bring me any pen in the known universe and drop it on Earth's surface, the mathematical equation that is gravity in this context, will always attract mass to mass. The small mass will be drawn to the big mass. Now that's an interesting thing. It seems that life is drawing things together, and that the isolated, the small part, is being drawn to the big part, which gets bigger, which grows. That's suggestive that in another billion years, more things will have come together. More things will have grown. Well, that's a pretty strong connection between me and the moon, between me and Jupiter. There's gravity on Jupiter. There's gravity here. Now, it expresses itself differently, but the equation that allows us to predict it to express itself a little bit differently here, 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 and here is the same equation. So gravity is connecting me to everything that is in the universe. That's pretty strong. I mean, you talk with a possible lover and they say, I love the Here Comes the Rain Again song by the Eurythmics. Oh, I love that song. Someone says, me too, me too. We're meant to be together because of a song. You like one song. Now, people go along with that. Why not? But what about gravity? I mean, that's that's a lot more intimate. Every single thing about our body is built around the gravitational equation. Every cell in our body is in attunement with gravity, and gravity is in relationship with every single one of our cells. A little bit more intimate than we happen to have enjoyed the same song, right? Every single cell of our body is following the same rules, the same rhythm, the same protocol, the same cult of gravity. Because gravity is a cult. All the atoms, all the molecules, all the planets, all the stars in the entire universe have agreed. Don't question it. Do what gravity says. Why? Just the way it is. That's the kind of guy gravity is. Let's all do this. The bigger objects, let's do that. Now, scientists can pretend that because they have discovered, they've figured out that everything in the universe has decided to follow gravity's idea of a relationship protocol, that their genius, or that they created gravity, or they can make up stories that say that gravity just is. We've never met it. We don't know exactly how gravity came into being, but because we discovered it, this is what gravity means and this is what it doesn't mean. But you have to be pretty ballsy, pretty ignorant and arrogant to not understand that gravity could have changed its mind. In the possibility field of all possible universes with all possible laws, rather than a big bang, the universe could have begun with a big poof or a big splash. Why not? You see, we're 24 billion years into the algorithm that went a certain way. But if you're in a simulation model that's creating billions upon billions of simulations to see which ones produce which effects. Well, maybe this program has, let's begin with a bang. And let's put 4 codes in. We'll put gravity, the strong force, the weak force. We'll do this, we'll do that. We'll electromagnetic stuff. Let's see what happens after 24 billion years with that one. Bing, enter. And here we are, looking around. But do we know what we don't know that we don't know? Do we know who and why set up that code? Do we know? Of course we don't know. Even our own set theory says we cannot understand a set until we're outside the set. We're not outside the set of the universe. Every scientist is in the set of science, which is in the set of people, which is in the set of planet, which is in the set of universe. And not one of those scientists is outside of any of those sets. How can a scientist be outside the set of science? How can a person be outside the set of people? How can an earthling be outside the set of an earthling? And how can a participant in the universe be outside the set of universe? They cannot. So it is arrogant in the extreme to pretend that we know what's going on within the sets that we can't fully understand until we get outside the set. But we can say that gravity links all things. We can say that not only gravity, the whole laws of physics, as we've been able to learn them to date, and remember, science is changing its mind rapidly about almost everything. I mean, you think the scientists today think the same thing of the scientists 100 years ago? Well, do the math. What will the scientists 100 years from now think about the science of today? And what about the scientists 100 years after that, given the exponential increase in evolution, given we're on an exponential curve? How is it that the scientists in 200 years will not have changed their ideas about our science more radically than we've changed our ideas of science in the last 100 years? But don't question the scientists. So the hypocrisy and politics of politics also seems to connect with the hypocrisy and politics of family life, of science. You don't think scientists have politics? You don't think that the person who controls funding at the top of the agency that likes this and this and this doesn't pick the scientists that agree with him and decide that science is going to head this way during my tenure as this fund disbursement? You can go broke, or you can study the things that I want you to study. Why? Because I want you to study them. Because that's the scientific thing to study? Yes. Yes. Please. I am the ultimate embodiment of science. It's absolute absurdity. So there is a divergence between the cult and the data and the science. The science is pointing to interconnectivity. Ask an anthropologist. Where were our ancestors and where were the black people's ancestors, right? Because we're all racist. We all think our race is better or worse than some other race. Oh, if we're mentally educated, we of course pretend that we're not racist. Oh, I would never be racist. the body language, the programmed body language after being raised in a cult like our own, is still racist. We raise racists. And there's a deep link between a racist cult and the racist members of the cult. There's a link. Now, you ask an anthropologist, where did I come from? Well, you came from here, and then you went from here, and your grandfather came from there, and where did they come from? Well, they came from here, and here, and here, and here, and here. And it seems that at some point in time, we all started on the African plains. So we have shared relatives. We're all one family. And it seems like the connection between all biology goes back further. You ask Charles Darwin or all the reputable scientists, well, where did you come from? And where did people come from? Well, they evolved from apes, they evolved from this, and where did they come from? Well, they evolved from other animals. And where did they evolve from? Well, they evolved from plants. Where did they from slime, from rock, from dust? So the Big Bang is the ultimate grandmother, the ultimate grandfather, the source. And we are interconnected with all things. So this is the truth if we follow the data. Now, if we follow the cult, it's of course a different story because, cults never promise to be intelligent. They promise homogeneity. I mean, they will hold a structure, however absurd, so that you can recognize them from other cults and other structures, however absurd. We are the ones who eat this. Well, is that really the best tasting food on the planet? It doesn't matter. We eat this. We don't eat this. Any particular reason? We don't, because we don't. And that's why we don't. And we think this. We believe this. We don't believe that. Evidence-based. You've done a comparative study of all the different cults on the planet today, or all the 9,500 cults that are now extinct. You found this cult had the way? No. We do it because we do it, and that's why we do it. Any objection to me? Absolutely. Don't change it. Don't knock it. We are proud members of this cult, and we are the ones who do this and don't do that. Okay, good for you. Any room for growth in there? Change? Improvement? No. This is the way we do things around here. So you have ossification, you have stupidity, you have lack of data. This is the cult pattern. But over here we have the one. Now, the cult hacks into the one. It first of all divides it in half. That's a good starting point. Take everything that is, divide it in half. How do we do it? Language. This is black. This is white. This is black. Who cares? Okay, there was one, now there's two. Well, black is bad. We don't like black. We like white. Okay, that's step one in the separation. Now, you can kind of get a sense of how radical this step in the journey towards endarkenment is. Because we take the one, we cut you in half, and your kidneys don't work very well, do they? Your lungs are going to have trouble. The airtight seal has been broken. How's the blood going to get from this side, from the heart that's slightly more on this side, over to this side? Now, luckily, this surgery isn't real. Meaning reality doesn't cut itself in half just because we stuck a label on it. Because reality isn't dumb. Remember, reality has gone, according to our legend, from the size of a pea over the span of 24 billion years into all that is. That's what reality has done. What have you been doing the last 24 billion years? And if we gave you 24 billion years, scientist or otherwise, could you get an energy mass the size of a pea and create a universe that happened to have among billions of life-affirming planets one like ours, in which people could sit around watching videos about the language-based version of reality we construct? Well, that's what we did. We didn't really do it because if you were to cut reality in half in truth, we would cease to be. Take the planet, cut it in half, see what happens with the molten core, and then say this half is better than this half. You're dead before you can finish your theory. Say that the black race is worse than the white race, so go back to the beginning of time, kill all the Africans, and you don't get to exist because your hereditary line has been broken. So see how that works for you. Again, you don't get to postulate your stupid theory because you're dead. This is, the freedom to be delusional. It's not the freedom to change reality. We go back to the time of slime and we say, oh, ick, I don't like slime. Okay, you're dead. Whole world finished. Never got to exist because you were a picky moron who stopped the evolution of all life by saying, ew, get rid of that slime. Well, luckily, reality doesn't listen to the cult brainwashed minds that produce such ignorance. Reality just keeps on going on. But the more we believe the delusion of our own paradigms based on language, the more we believe that we are better than or separate than the animals out of which we grew. It's a little bit questionable, isn't it? We do the same thing with our relatives. I have nothing to do with them. Don't be seen with me, Mom. Get away from me. You're an embarrassment. Well, it's a little bit tricky, mathematically speaking, to say you're a byproduct of an embarrassment that is embarrassed by your raw material. These are all cult delusions. They're cult distinctions, and we begin by cutting reality in half, and that's just the beginning. We then start cutting the half down into bits. This is a finger, this is the right finger, this is the hand, this is the elbow, this is a piece of yellow dirt, this is a piece of red dirt, this is an electron, this is a proton. We just keep hacking away with language until we have created billions upon billions of distinctions. Billions upon billions of distinctions that we can't even keep track of. But we have, through the artifice of language, cut this thing away from this thing, and this thing away from that thing, and that thing away from this thing. And now we've cut ourselves off from our families. We've cut ourselves off from our cult. We've cut ourselves off from the species by denying our origin. We've cut ourselves off with judgments Because as soon as we create polarity by taking the one and dividing it into two, we then proceed to say that this half of the earth, this half of existence, this half of the polarity is better than the other half. Now, where exactly we get the clarity about that, particularly since what's good and what's bad has changed dramatically, and that the vast majority of what people have invented that's good and people have invented that's bad, the vast majority of that is now extinct. 9,500 languages are dead. 9,500 cosmologies are dead. 9,500 worldviews and dogmas and cult memes are dead. The majority of all species are unrecognizable from their origins. We look a lot different than slime. Things are always changing, things are always moving, which means that any truth, any dogma, any statement that's too rigid becomes useless over time. And it's replaced by usually new dogmas, new truths that serve a purpose for a period of time. Now, imagine living in this body here. Here's this body cut up into all these bits. Got to be pretty painful. It's bad enough cutting you in half, your body, right? But this is reality, that we're chopping up into billions of little bits. And in the illusion of language, we say this is a tree, and this is a window. Window, you've got nothing to do with this tree. We'll move this down a little bit. We'll just make it more basic. You've got nothing to do with one another. You're a window, you're a tree. You're a plus, you're a minus. Of course they do. They're both written in white ink. Plus and minus, both mathematical symbols. They were both invented out of thin air by cults. Cults invented mathematics as a way to cut reality up into bits. And cults invented language as a way to cut reality up into bits. The cuts aren't real, or reality wouldn't function. Now, this is profound because look at a possibility field. It's best visualized spatially since we're heavily influenced by the paradigm of materialism. But the question is, if I spin around here, and spin around and spin around, come all the way 360 degrees here, we've cut the totality of the circle down into 365. We just cut it into 365 bits, pretty randomly. We could have cut it into 220 bits. We could have cut it into 10 bits, 1 bit, 2 bits, 10, We could divide the circle in as many ways as we want, but we just say 360 degrees to represent, it's not the circle, but to represent the circle, the one, the infinite gradients of perspective. Now, imagine that you want to take space and cut it in half. And now you can only turn 180 degrees. But could you? Let's say that your language actually had any power, and you could take half of the 360 degrees, half of the circle of space all around us, and delete half of it. So that, half of your body and half of everything on the right side would be there, and all the left side would disappear. Do you think you could still turn around in that 180 degrees? Do you think if you deleted just 1 degree of time space and said, I don't like that one, do you think you could still exist? Do you think the other degrees in the circle could exist if 1 degree was minus? Just take this tiny little sliver of space-time of the circle, and we're just going to poof, and now it doesn't exist. But you can go all the way around to it, then all the way around to it, or you can jump over it. Of course not. Of course not. What about a car tire? It's like you think you can cut a sliver out of the car tire and it doesn't collapse and stop being a car tire? When you change just half of a degree of space-time this way, you affect the entire circle. So what about a possibility field with infinite possibilities? Well, let's delete just one possibility, right? Donald Trump, will delete him, right? As a possibility in the possibility field. Just delete one. Or Hitler, or whoever else you happen to be irritated with at the time. Well, how can you have an infinite possibility field with one possibility missing? You think that's possible? To have an infinite possibility field with one possibility missing? Of course not. So the question is, would you want to collapse? There it is, the infinite possibility field. No, I don't like this bit. Take it out. I don't like it. Okay, take it out. Poof. Nothing exists. What do you mean nothing exists? Well, you have the infinite possibility field, and then you have a probability field inside that. Then you have an actuality field here. So, okay. Well, probability is possibility squared. Quote, reality, physicality, is probability squared. So if this reality is made up of this reality, and this reality is made up of this reality, and you delete one possibility, so you collapse the possibility field, then you collapse, of course, the probability field. Now there's nothing there. So it's everything or nothing. Which do you want? Do you want nothing? But it's a little bit mathematically weak, isn't it? Because you want nothing. But then you don't exist, and neither does nothing. So then there's no you to want nothing. There's just nothing. But here you are. You are something. In a possibilities field, in a probability field, in an actuality field that is dependent on the probability field and the possibility field. Here you are. Do you want to stop existing? Because this is ultimately the crisis, the challenge, if anyone wants to deal with reality and follow the whole continuum along, this is ultimately the problem of prejudice, of superiority, of righteousness, of moral hierarchy. This is ultimately the problem with saying this race is better than this race, this person is better innately. Because as soon as you get to that innately, you then start thinking, well, rationally, if the infinite possibility field could exist, but just have these few things that I don't like removed. I love infinite possibility, but just this one thing about my husband, just get rid of it. I hate it. There's one thing about my parents. Oh my goodness. I mean, the whole of reality would be so much better off if it didn't exist. So that I could take this one thing, this tiny little thing. I mean, everything else I'll put up with, I'll moan and groan about, but I wouldn't. But this one thing, it just couldn't exist. And the whole wave. You know, what happens when you delete a moment in time? You delete a moment in time, but what about all this? What about the whole wave? You delete this one moment. And then it doesn't exist. For you. It may exist in the probability field. It may exist in the possibility field, but it doesn't exist. And if it was truly deleted from the probability, from the possibility field, you don't exist either. So we cut up reality with language into all these little bits. And then we believe the cult that cuts reality up into all these little bits. And we step into the maze of distinction. Now, in Christianity, this is referred as falling from grace. Now, why is it a fall from grace? Well, the sphere is the most graceful circle there is. Just make this a wheel, and you'd have to wonder, if you argue with that, why don't you put a triangle on your car? Put 4 triangles and drive to work. Could be a bumpy ride, flying up and down 2 or 3 feet in the air at 75 miles an hour, trying to steer when you're constantly thrown airborne by the speed at which 4 triangles are thrusting you into one of the most violent rides you've ever had. It's not grace, is it? The circle is grace because it's equal, because it's one. It's the feminine expression of reality. All one, equal, interconnected. That's science. The cult may tell you that the toenail has nothing to do with so-and-so else's toenail, unless you bring in an anthropologist who says, well, actually, it comes out of the same genetic code. And if you go back some hundreds of thousands to millions of years ago, you'll find that code in this people and diverging here, and it actually comes from there. And then you say, well, okay, fine. That toenail has nothing to do with the animals. You say Christianity has nothing to do with Siberian tribes. So where did Santa Claus come from? How do you get this overlap between a mushroom cult of red and white mushrooms and reindeer? How do you get that in a completely distinct Christian cult? They made a deal. The Siberian tribes weren't interested in Christianity. They were getting high on mushrooms, having divine visions with the Creator. They weren't going to give up their Amanita muscaria. So, what are the Christians to do? They can't go back to their pig-headed higher-ups and say, we fail, because pig-headed higher-ups who are hypocrites will whip you, in the name of Christianity, right? Kindness, love, forgiveness, turn the other cheek. Go back and get them, Okay, what are we going to do? I know. That mushroom you're talking about that's so wonderful, that's giving all these great visions, that reindeer are interested in getting high and all this stuff. Well, that's the birthplace of Christ. Santa Claus is good buds with Jesus, and they're like, well, anyone who's good buds with the mushroom has got to be, that's a good referral. So, okay, we'll go along. You create your Santa Claus and all this, and we'll go along with that. But we are not giving up this mushroom because it makes a lot more sense than you do. And so then, so where's the purity? The pure word of God. And this myth came from that myth, and that one evolved into that one? You see, you cannot look closely at reality without understanding that every single thing that you hate is inextricably linked to every single thing that you love. You're just too dumb as a cult indoctrinated human to see the science that the cult does not emphasize in order to maintain its cult. Because cults are not intelligent. They're not out to help you understand reality. They're out to maintain a status quo and an identity. And to do that, it's always us against them. Because how can you have an identity if you don't have an other identity? I am this pattern. You are that pattern. And of course, my pattern is better than your pattern. So it's us against them, in tension with them. My pattern is the good one, yours pattern is the bad one. This is me. I call God Yahweh and this and that. You call God Buddha, you call him this, you call, couldn't be a woman, right? Because we are chauvinistic at this period of time, and that would not be consistent. We're this, and that's that. We are this, and that's that. It just doesn't hold up, and that's why we call it the fall from grace. Into what? The knowledge of good and evil. What's the knowledge of good and evil? It's called language. Everything is. Here's space and everything is. We fall into language. We cut it in half. Now there's up and down. Which one's good? Which one's bad? Up is good, down is bad. You've just fallen out of the garden into the knowledge of good and evil. What's the knowledge of good and evil? Language. Words. That's all. That's up. That's down. You believe that? You've fallen out of the garden. That's up. That's down. And don't tell anyone, but down there is bad. Up there is good. Now, these cult myths are pretty flaky because the same person that's trying to determine which is good and which is bad is the same kind of person who looks at an orchid blooming Oh, so lovely. I love that orchid. Don't touch that. That's dirty. That's dirty. That's dirty. That's dirty. And dirt, as we all know, as a good cult member, dirt is bad. So you like the orchid, but you don't like dirt, right? Yep, that's it. Well, why don't you try growing an orchid without any dirt? Even more revealing. You have an apple tree blossoming, an orchid blooming, a lily, whatever it is that you think is the good thing. The fool will mist the orchid, right? And this and that, and tend the orchid, and like, anything I can do to help you? Oh, just do it. That's the fool. The gardener, the scientist, will water the roots, will look at the soil. To the gardener, to the scientist, the roots are precious. So you've got some lovely little maiden, right? Oh, she's so beautiful. Oh, her parents are a bitch, you know. I hate their parents, you know, but oh, my goodness. You see, we are a cult, having cut the world in half. You know, it takes experience to understand that if you want a lovely flower, you can ignore the flower. It's natural. What you need to focus on are the roots in the soil. A gardener does not mist the air and do this and change the molecules in the air. No. A gardener puts compost in the soil. What's that? Dead stuff. Dead stuff is the food for living stuff. If you want to have a magnificent garden, collect lots of dead and dying and decaying stuff. Number one. Number two, deal with the soil. Number three, look at the roots of the plant. Can it grow? Can the roots grow? That's what an intelligent person pays attention to. The very opposite. The very opposite. Now, this metaphor can be taken into any arena. Oh, I want to feel love and joy. I don't want to feel hate and bad. I want to feel excitement and enthusiasm. I do not want to feel jealousy and rotten and all this stuff. I want to feel relaxed and I do not want to feel stressed. So, okay, you've cut the emotional circle in half, as cults are wont to do. You've started off with the full continuum of emotion, cut it in half. These are now the bad emotions. These are now the good emotions. You want to have the good ones, right? So I'm going to joyfully look at my joy, and I'm going to turn away from my anger there, and I'm going to turn away from my hurt there, and I'm going to turn away from my jealousy there, and joyfully look at my joy. But it doesn't work any better than it works to water the orchid flower. Try putting bits of compost, dead stuff, on an orchid flower. It doesn't work. Anything I can do for your little orchid flower? Prolong your life? It's complete nonsense. You realize you're dealing with a fool, not a gardener. The gardener looks at the leaves and the flowers and tends to the roots. The psychological scientist that is competent understands that joy, happiness, gratitude are easy if you tend to the dynamics of the fear, of the hate, of the rage, of the envy, of the contracting side of the emotions. You water those. You take the hurt and you give it a healing balm. You take the pain and you heal the wound. You reduce the likelihood of the separation, the loss from needs and value. You create support for survival and security, and love and belonging blossom. You kill off survival and security. Try going to a tomato plant with a bargain, right? Because you're a good capitalist. You're not going to be ripped off by a mere tomato plant. Tell the tomato plant, hey, look, I don't trust you. I'm a reptile. And so here, produce a tomato, and then I'll give you a little bit of water. I'll give you a little bit of fertilizer, but I'm not going to be ripped off like I was before. Give me a tomato, and then I'll water your roots. Okay, I'm waiting. You didn't put it out, so no water for you. We do this with kids. Get an A, and then I'll do this. Do it good, do this, this, and this. We don't understand the science. If you want innocence to blossom, you've got to fertilize with trustworthiness. You take away that, you take away this. In an ecological equation where all things are interconnected and interdependent, from the simple equation that no object can exist without space, and no space can exist without objects, but we love to pretend they're separate, to no orchid can exist without roots, the up cannot exist without the down, no joy can exist without tending one's fear and one's hate. So we don't understand reality. We understand our cult. And our cult is divorced from reality because it has cut the reality into bits in an illusion called language, creating a fictitious knowledge of good and evil that does not, in fact, exist once we remove the language. Now, what are we up to in this age of Endarkenment? Because every cult, having established its memes, having established its identity, its pattern of cutting up the world and saying this is good and this is bad and this is good and this is bad, having done that, the cult indoctrinates its members into the knowledge of good and evil, into the wound. You don't think this hurts? 10 billion cuts, lacerating your innate connection with all things, leaving you feeling completely separate from everything, including yourself, which is the tether. Yourself connects you with all things and all times through the probability field and the possibility field and the actuality field. You are all things, all time. But the you that you know, having cut reality into bits, is a very tiny piece of all things and all time. If you didn't have language and you didn't have identity, the one that's saying this is me and that's that, and you look through the lens of the one, you are the one. As soon as you delineate yourself and say, I think this, feel this, say that, do this and be that, well, now that you have identified this, you are now that. That's me. Those are my thoughts. Those are my feelings. You hurt my feelings. You violated, disrespected my thought. This was my boundary. I put a boundary right here. Right here. That's it. Well, you just went over it. You just violated my boundary. I put another boundary right here. Well, you just went there. You just violated that boundary. That's me. That boundary. That's me. This is it. See this? That's me. Up, you just went over that. That you violated me. So, having done all this, as a cult, we feel separate from I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I feel separate from this, and so, they're having a good time over there, but they're not eating our diet. Remember, they're not eating our diet, and so, what they're doing, that seems like a nice building to go into. You can't go into, that's for Jewish people. It seems like such a beautiful building. No, that's for men. Rabbi is doing this. That's not for you. Go away. You don't belong here. Get born as a man and do this, and then you can go in that building. Well, I don't feel like I belong here either. I don't feel, we're the ones that do this, but what about this feeling in me? So none of us fit fully and neatly into the little box that our cult defines. This is us, that's them. None of us do. We have a secret life. We have a secret, basically. And the secret is we're really interested in so-and-so who's a Mormon. I thought we were clear in this family. We do not believe in hocus pocus. Yeah, but there's something about him. Something about him. Don't tell mom and dad. Don't tell the cult. Don't let it be seen in public. My goodness. My goodness. And cults lie constantly with the most inane things. Cut off the tip of your son's foreskin before he has choice. It's what we do in this cult. Genital mutilation. Sew up your daughter's clitoris in this cult. It's what we do. You want her to grow up and be a woman, right? Kick him out of the house. You want him to be an independent person, don't you? Put him in prison for this and this, so they'll learn to do what they're told with this. Cults have been and are wrong constantly because they're based on these fragments. So we have the descent out of the garden into our box. Now, our particular box in our cult it has a couple of layers that are very isolating. So the first layer is materialism. And this says that if you cannot see it with your senses, it doesn't exist. That's the first little bit. So that takes probably, if we were to take the whole and say how much is of all that is, will be, and ever has been, how much doesn't fit in the senses? Well, this somewhat changes over time. Doctors used to say that germs didn't exist. While they were killing their patients with germs, they denied it because surgeons said, I can't see it, doesn't exist. Louis Pasteur and several other scientists spent most of their lives trying to convince their colleagues not to kill their patients with germs because, these were good surgeons who weren't going to believe any namby-pamby religious stuff about germs, stuff you can't see. We don't believe in ghosts. We don't want your superstition. We have the right to kill our patients because if we can't see it, it doesn't exist. So they would touch cadavers that they were busily dissecting in the good scientific method, and then they'd go over to the infants and give birth and kill the mother and kill the infant with the germs and disease in the cadaver, and then they would deny all responsibility, right? And say, come to the hospital. We have your interest at heart. We're doing it today. The third leading cause of harm, medically speaking, is hospitals and hospital malpractice. But come to the hospital and be cured. Hopefully we won't amputate the wrong arm or give you the wrong medication, and Happens all the time. Doctors are incredibly unhealthy. Rushing around saving patients. More doctors are addicted to painkillers and various drugs than the average person. It helps them get through the day working 16-hour shifts in hospitals that are not about healing, they're about making money. Well, doctors that work longer shifts fit into that. Makes more money for the shareholders. How do the doctors accommodate the shareholders? They take stimulants, get addicted. So, that's our cult. So we divide the cult into our cult into what can be seen and what cannot be seen. Prove it to me means you figure out how to take whatever it is that you think or know or whatever and put it into a physical repeated form that you can show in a laboratory. You don't have a laboratory? It doesn't exist then. It's not important. We're materialists here. So we cut the world into that. That's half. Then, of course, just because we're rabid materialists doesn't mean we're sane or have to be rational. So then, at the same time, we're rabid materialists, we say we believe in God. But not God. God is all that is. Our little picture of God. So then we cut into our religion, and we're this one. But then we don't do the things that our religion says to do, so now we're bad. So now we cut into this little bit here. Then we're cut into gender, and the whole gender thing is ridiculous. Men are better than women? Women are better than men? Men are bad, women are bad? It's absolutely absurd. You create a man for me without a woman, step one, and then create a woman for me without a man. You give birth to either gender without the other. Now, if you can't pull even that off with one human, how do you make the argument that they're separate? Men are not women. Women are not men. At one level, but it's a pretty weak equation if you don't exist without the other, and the other doesn't exist without you. We're back to the chauvinism of space and object. If the space doesn't exist without the two objects at the end, and the two objects don't exist without the space in which to reside, you're out to lunch. But we believe it. We're putting our consciousness into this sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a sliver, and out of this full range of probability, possibility, we end up in this tiny little dot that has nothing apparent, according to the cult, has nothing to do with anyone else. Don't come talking to me. That has nothing to do with me. That's your problem. It's not my problem. That's a lie. That is absolutely a lie. If you understand cult dynamics, cult ecology, so you didn't report the sex offender because that's my problem until they attack your daughter. And then what? I say it's your problem, and then we let it go on. How many people have to be infected with a disease before it's our problem as opposed to your problem? It's just a matter of how dumb we want to be for how long. AIDS wasn't our problem until it affected heterosexuals, because we were the good ones. We were the ones that liked the opposite sex, and the ones that liked the same sex, well, they were the bad ones. So of course God's killing the bad ones, and it's not our problem. Why should we waste money curing AIDS? It's not our problem. It's their problem. Every single time our arrogance and our stupidity and our irrationality in the face of ecological evidence to the contrary, every time our arrogance and stupidity has trumped our humanity and our ecology, we and our children suffer and pay the price, whether we are dumb enough to realize, or smart enough to realize that, or too dumb to realize it. No, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not getting involved. Your children are, and their children are, for the next 10,000 years. Anyone you care about and their offspring will be affected by what you disowned and what rippled out from that. Now, some cults, of course, have great mythologies and great memes to deal with these obvious facts. Things like, let's think about how this will affect the next 7 generations. And other younger cults, such as our own, say, I don't care about that. I just want this now. Why do you want this? Well, my cult says it's good. Guns and pussy, money, a good drink. Where do you get this crap? Where do you get this crap? Well, my cult told me it was good. My cult said that's what men do. That's what men want. I bought it. But how separate do you have to become? From how much? How lonely in that separation do you have to become? To what degree? Before you give up on the cult and start going home. Because the cult will deny your existence. You're outside the cult. It will deny the existence of the self, of consciousness. Scientists have been working hard to prove that consciousness doesn't exist for the last while. They love it. They've been working hard to prove that consciousness doesn't exist, that the self doesn't exist. And when you need love and belonging, that's a human need. Anthropologists sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, the hierarchy of human needs popularized by Abraham Maslow, survival, security, love, and belonging. When in order to belong to your cult, to be respected in your cult, you have to deny everything you cannot see. You have to deny your empathy for all the different diverse expressions of humanity and life. When you have to deny your love, which is the awareness of interconnectedness. When you have to deny your love, your awareness of interconnectedness to all things, in order to be a member of a cult, that does not believe in its own existence, it's way, 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 way out in the boondocks. It's off the chart in terms of separation. To belong to this cult, you have to believe that you don't exist, that you have no purpose, that you have no value, that you are nothing, and that you are completely isolated and disconnected from everything else. That's the price of joining the club? And we're the ones who believe that? Slowly, in the indoctrination of language, we start seeing less and less of reality and more of the cult. However, as a sick cult, it renders us isolated. Now, we know, of course, medically and otherwise, that if you take a little pool of water, you have a nice flowing river here, you take a bit of this river, you isolate it in a little pool here of stagnant water. We know it dies. When you take a human being and isolate it from its lineage, its family, its globe, its population, its animals, well, it dies, deteriorates, it gets sick. And when you put that water back into the river and it becomes aerated and starts moving again, it becomes healing, it becomes a blessing again to life, to connectivity, to life. And that is the challenge. That is the challenge. So we recover from the age of Endarkenment, moving towards the age of Enlightenment. It's a little bit better if we are going to divide things into two. We move to retrace our steps. How do we retrace our steps? Well, we murdered our brothers and sisters in the North American plains, pretending that they were not us, pretending that they were less than us, when in many ways they were more than us. They understood their interconnectivity with all things. They understood that. And they were not separate from their earth and treated it as sacred. They didn't deal with the depression that is our disease, the disease of stagnant water, the disease of isolation. So we go back and we honor the murder of part of ourselves, part of the human species. And we grieve the killing of another part of the probability field, and with it, a part of ourselves. We look at our violation, our disregard of species, our cruelty to animals. We start understanding that when we treat animals as if they have nothing to do with us other than making money, that we treat them cruelly, that the animals become sick. And when we eat sick animals, surprise, surprise, we become sick as well. We let go of the dogmas of a Frenchman called Mr. Chauvin, of the rabid materialist scientists and their desperation to prove that the sociopathic Christian God of their childhood, who terrified them was just a fictitious structure of language. To be connected to all things, for consciousness to be meaningful, for love to matter, you don't have to get rid of God, you just have to get rid of your parents' stupidity. And there's a return to more awareness. When we grieve for what we violated, there is a return to more awareness. There is a return to, in this particular metaphor, towards the light, but it's really a return to the relationship with light and dark, with masculine and feminine, with space and the objects, an innately equal relationship in which more and more is sacred.